So yeah, just welcome to everybody to this event, to Reflections on the In the Grip of Change online exhibition. The panel discussion is going to reflect on that exhibition, one that took place in Senate House Library from the 29th of October 2024 to 12th of April 2025. The exhibition was then subsequently made available online as part of our celebrations of Windrush Day in this year, 2025. And so we're bringing together today basically a distinguished panel of speakers who have kind of personal, family, professional connections to the items that are featured in the exhibition. And we're going to reflect on the objects' histories or their relevance and impact to today. So for those who don't know, the exhibition itself was designed to showcase the archive of Caribbean material held in Senate House Library's special collections. It focuses essentially on the gradual transition of Britain's former colonial colonies to independence in the 1960s to 80s and the period that followed. It also explores the pre-independence experience of Black British Caribbean migrants to the UK, their resilience and resistance in the face of structural racism, and the long history of the Windrush scandal. Also, importantly, points to the significance of transnational activism through a spotlight on the lives of CLR Jones, Billy Strachan, and Claudia Jones. So with this goal of uniting the personal and the political, the exhibition also draws, on the oral histories from the AHRC funded project, which was called the Windrush Scandal in its transnational and Commonwealth context. The exhibition was co-curated by myself, Juanita Cox, and here to the left of me, Agla Rublak, who is the academic librarian at Senate House Library, and with a focus on history. And she's actually going to just talk us through the online exhibition before we start. So over to you, Agla.
Yeah, so hello from me as well. And I'm just going to walk you very briefly through the online exhibition because some of you may have seen the physical exhibition, and thank you to all of you who did, but you might have not seen the online exhibition yet. So I'm just going to share my screen and give you a very brief walk through it. So you can access the online exhibition through our library website. This is Senate House Library's website that you are seeing right now. And right at the top here, you can just go and visit the online exhibition here. And what we've tried to do with the online exhibition is we've tried as much as possible to replicate some of the experience of visiting physical space. So if you go and explore the exhibition, you will be able to see all of the items and all of the different themes that they were presented in at the library space. So got one section on the Caribbean side of the narrative that Juanita just hinted at here, and it's visualized through some of the items that we have in our collections here. Most of them come from our archives and special collections, but some of them also come from our open shelves that we have here. So that's some material for you to browse through. And then we also have integrated into the exhibition the oral histories that Juanita mentioned, and which came from the two projects that she worked on as well. Then we have the section here on the experience of the Caribbean diaspora in Britain, again visualized and marked out by our library items here. And just to give you a bit more flavor of what you can do with this, you can just read through this if you want to, but you can also go into the items individually and find out more about them. So you'll get more information such as the title, brief description of what the item is, who created it, where it was created, and the date, and so on. And the good thing about it is also, and I really would encourage you as the history librarian here to do this, is you can also go to our archives and print collection and e-collection catalogue through the links in each item and have a look at the item yourself. It might take a little bit to load. Hopefully the archives catalogue is behaving today. Here we go. Exactly. So just to give you all the information that we have provided about the item from the library, and you are also able to request the item yourself. So if you're really keen to see something that is in the exhibition, you can also call it up and have a look at it yourself. And I should also say for international and attendees here that we have a virtual reading room service, which means that we can also show you these items on a live video call as well. So we have those options too. It's not just restricted to you coming to London and seeing these materials. They're quite accessible, and we do really encourage you to explore the collections further. What the exhibition also does is we have several ways of browsing the items beyond the narrative view. So we've got a little gallery here where you can explore the items in the gallery view. You can browse the exhibition with different filters. So you could, for example, if you only want to look at items from the 1910s, you can just filter it to this of the 1930s. What you can also do in the on the exhibition website is we've created a timeline of all the important events that are marked in the exhibition here. So you can have a bit of a chronological browse through all the events that we cover and get a bit more of a sense of the development, the historical development of what the exhibition is discussing. So this is quite a nice little tool that we've developed as part of that. And then the final thing I just wanted to highlight before we get to the much more interesting part of this event is what we really wanted to do with the exhibition events program and also with this online exhibition is add additional resources and additional value to the experience of going to visit the website. So we had a lot of events as part of the exhibition season, and we've made all the event recordings and details about the events available on the website here. So you can have a browse through that and experience it again if you couldn't attend these. And again, we also hint back to our collections, so you can go and explore for yourselves what else we have in the collection. I think Juanita and I really struggled with how little we could display during the exhibition itself, and there's so much more to look at. So if you're interested in coming back and taking a look, I encourage you to do so. But that's a quick run through the other exhibition, and can move on from here.
Great, thank you very much, Agla. So I'm going to briefly introduce everybody who's on the panel, but then ask them to speak about an item that's on the online exhibition and to talk about its relevance to them. I think the running order is going to be, we'll start with Erica Williams-Connell, and then Michael LaRose, who wasn't actually on the registration link. So we're really delighted that you've been able to join us, Michael. Luke Daniels, and also Amelia Gentleman. So if I start with the bio a very brief bio for Erica, and anything I've missed out, she can add to her section. But just to say that obviously she's the daughter of Eric Williams, Trinidad and Tobago's late first Prime Minister and eminent historian. She's the founding curator of the Eric Williams Memorial Collection Research Library, Archives and Museum, which is for short is called the EWCM at the University of the West Indies. The collection, inaugurated in 1998 by former US Secretary of State Colin Powell, was added to UNESCO's Memory of the World Register in 1999. She has written and spoken extensively about her father's legacy, including his seminal work, Capitalism and Slavery, which reinterpreted the kind of economic motivations behind the British transatlantic slave trade and laid intellectual groundwork for reparations discourse. So I know I'll have missed out a lot of your bio there, Erica, but over to you. Thank you.
That's perfectly fine. So I'm speaking about a letter in the collection, I believe it's the CLR James, in your CLR James collection, that was written by Eric Williams to Kwame Nkrumah on the 3rd anniversary of Ghana's independence in 1960. The West Indies are in the position of an orange. The British have sucked it dry, and their sole concern today is that they should not slip and get damaged on the peel. The offer is quite unacceptable, and we would prefer not to have it. It amounted to aid to Britain rather than to Trinidad. I do not propose to accept any concept of the Commonwealth, which means common wealth for Britain and common poverty for us. That was Eric Williams in London in November 1962, reacting publicly to the golden handshake offered by Britain to its departing colonies. In Trinidad and Tobago's case, the aid could only be used to buy British goods. His letter rejecting this British largesse dropped like a bomb in Harold Macmillan's 10 Downing Street. The fight continued for a year, with Williams eventually having to capitulate, but not before becoming a giant thorn in the British backside. Because of his decades of study of the transatlantic slave trade and Britain's eager involvement in it, because Williams stood alone in his still celebrated 1944 book, Capitalism and Slavery, in placing the slave trade and plantations centrally among explanations of Britain's Industrial Revolution, Williams was insulted by the offer. He was thus the only post-colonial leader to refuse this generosity once the program was initiated after Ceylon's, now Sri Lanka, independence in 1948. Senegal didn't decline, Nigeria didn't decline, and nor did Nkrumah's Ghana, 5 years before Williams's impertinence. This, despite the former's revolutionary stance in trumpeting Pan-Africanism, decolonization, and an end to Western hegemony. Williams, in my opinion, held conflicting views about his African counterpart. He respected and upheld Ghana's uncompromising Africanness under Nkrumah's tutelage. As he said in 1964, after his official visit as Prime Minister to the continent, if Senegal is predominantly French, if Sierra Leone is predominantly British, if Liberia is predominantly American, then Ghana is predominantly African. It is an African state ready to oppose Britain, France, America, and all three combined, and it is belligerently African. While there, and despite some noise about Nkrumah's state of mind, he found him to be lucid in his expositions and dynamic in his vision. Touring the Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, as well as the Volta Dam project, touted as the largest single investment in the economic development of Ghana, Williams deemed the country's growth strategy to be Africa's premier showcase. By that time, however, Williams was also well aware of Nkrumah's disfavor by other African countries as well as the West. This was not helped by the latter's complete abrogation of democratic norms and practices under the guise of rooting out corruption and standing up to Western powers, who he fervently believed, and shared this with the Prime Minister, were plotting his political demise. Still, Williams could not possibly have countenanced Nkrumah's personal despotism, one-party state, suppression of dissent, or his president for life nomenclature, no matter the justification. As he declared, the dominant note in Ghana is the domination of Nkrumah and the Convention People's Party, CPP. Nkrumah is everywhere. It is Nkrumah Market, Nkrumah University, Nkrumah House, and Nkrumah's pictures are everywhere, sometimes as many as 3 in a single room. The CPP headquarters is a tremendous building. The party is in the vanguard at official welcomes and receptions, and one met the party before one met the government at the airport. The motorcade travels with party vans in the lead, broadcasting comments by a party member. Party outriders precede the official police outriders. The government is an arm of the party. The party is the state, and Nkrumah is the party. Williams also characterized Nkrumah's hold on power as being as much a prisoner in the castle, dubbed the point of no return, as the slaves who were kept there before they were transported to the New World. Boats maintain a 24-hour patrol at sea. There is a truck outside the wall, presumably of his residence, with machine guns mounted on it. The army is on guard. The place swarms with security police. Still, none of these measures prevented several assassination attempts during Nkrumah's tenure and a subsequent military coup d'etat in 1966. He spent the rest of his days in Guinea, where he died in 1972. An ignominious end for one who initially showed such promise, a promise about which Williams was effusive in a salute to Nkrumah and Ghana 12 years before. I think it is right to say that never since the achievement of independence by the United States of America was the independence of any country, and a very small country at that, hailed with such satisfaction and hope for the future as was the independence of Ghana on March 6, 1957. The world felt that a great step forward had been made, that a door long closed had at last been thrown open, representative and symbolical of the forward march of Africa. The heroic struggles, the determination, the endurance and the discipline that were shown in the attainment of your goal, writes Williams to Nkrumah, continue to be an inspiration to us in the West Indies. We watch with admiration the audacity of your perspectives and the care and energy with which you pursue them. So how does one reconcile Williams's esteem of Nkrumah in early 1960 and his disapproval of and disillusionment by the later descent into authoritarianism a mere 4 years later? Pragmatism and the conviction that Nkrumah, whatever his significant shortcomings, represented a stopgap to deter the West from grasping for what Williams termed the third scramble for Africa, the naked attempt to exert leverage on the newly independent countries. The first being the Atlantic slave trade, and the second being the division of the continent among European countries in the 1880s. Williams also feared that the goal of Chinese and Russian communists was to foment conflict. This led him to conclude, perhaps hyperbolically, in 1964, nothing will come out of Africa without Nkrumah. If Nkrumah goes, then Africa will be for several decades to come a battleground of competing interests, American, European, Russian, and Chinese. This brief expose has been occasioned by a congratulatory letter in your Senate House Library that Eric Williams wrote to Nkrumah on the 3rd anniversary of Ghana's independence on March 6, 1960. It is located in the CLR James file and refers to the passing of Williams's friend and associate George Padmore, whose achievements on behalf of the emancipation of Africa and Africans were lauded by Nkrumah and Ghana. Williams's acknowledgement of this, however, did not prevent him from bemoaning the fact that West Indians had traditionally deserted the West Indies. Padmore for Africa, James for the absurdities of world revolution, but I had already made my decision about my future. I would stick to the West Indies. I have quoted deliberately and substantially here from a variety of sources, for the simple reason that if history is to be appreciated, it must be known. And what better way than to hear directly from the protagonists themselves in their own words? As Williams was to say in 1969, history is not a record of battles and politicians, dates and events, or even of the follies and foibles of mankind, but rather a record of the development of humanity, of life, and of society in all their various manifestations. And so I close with an African proverb: until the lions have their historians, tales of the hunt will be written by the hunter. Thank you.
But yeah, just to thank you for your talk and for highlighting the shift from Eric Williams' pride in Ghana to the disillusionment and kind of tackling that history. We'll come back to that when we do the sort of Q&A. And if you don't mind staying online, I'll introduce
Of course.
the next speaker. So we're going to come next to Michael LaRose. Michael is the director of New Beacon Books, the UK's first Black publisher and bookshop. New Beacon Books had been founded in 1966 by the late John LaRose, his father, and the late Sarah White. LaRose became closely involved in the Black education movement, including the fight against the ESN schools, those educationally subnormal schools, and was a pioneering advocate of Black supplementary education. The papers of John LaRose are held at the George Padmore Institute. Under Michael's leadership, New Beacon remains a vital space for Black intellectual thought, community empowerment, and cultural preservation in Britain. I hope that gives a kind of an introduction, but add to it.
That's a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, but yeah, over to you.
Great. Thanks very much. What I wanted to talk to you about today was the book in the exhibition, Fraudacity by J.J. Thomas, and how New Beacon came to publish that book and why we thought it was important. And secondly, the impact of that book, its production, and finally, the impact on me as a young person in Britain. New Beacon was a part of a literary publishing and political movement in Britain, which included pioneers like Margaret Busby, founder of Allison and Busby, and Jessica and Eric Huntley, founders of Bogle Louverture Publications and the Walter Rodney Bookshop. Not forgetting bookshops like Harriet Tubman Bookshop, Grassroots, Head Start, Sabah, Centerprise, Unity, and many others. 2026 marks 60 years since the founding of New Beacon Books. I hope you will join us in our 60th anniversary celebrations in 2026. Keep checking our website, or give me your email or contact at the end of the event. John LaRose is a political and cultural activist from Trinidad and Tobago who came to Britain in 1961. He brought with him the experience of the anti-colonial struggle, the popular culture of Kaiso, Steel Band and Carnival, and the inspiration of the Haitian Revolution, the 1930s Caribbean-wide workers' insurrection and union movement, the writers and intellectuals from Trinidad's 1930s Beacon magazine, the Pan-Africanism of George Padmore, Henry Sylvester Williams, and Marcus Garvey. The experience of participating in political and cultural movements in Britain was also very influential on New Beacon. From the Caribbean Artist Movement, CAM, the Black Power Movement with the Mangrove 9 struggle, new artists, writers, and literature, the supplementary schools and Black education movements, the campaigns against police malpractice and brutality, the New Cross Massacre Action Committee, and the campaigns against repression in post-independence and neo-colonial Guyana, Trinidad, Ghana, Kenya, Sudan, and Nigeria. These experiences helped New Beacon with formulating the vision for the International Book Fair of Radical Black and Third World Books between 1982 and 1995, along with the formation of the George Padmore Institute Archive, GPI, in 1991. The idea to form New Beacon was born in the Caribbean and Venezuela. In my piece, John LaRose and the Vision for New Beacon in 2007 for the New Beacon catalogue, I paraphrased, "Growing up in a colonial society made John LaRose acutely aware that colonial policy was based on a deliberate withholding of information from the population. There was discontinuity of information from one generation to the next generation. Publishing, therefore, was a vehicle to give an independent validation to one's own culture, history, and politics, a sense of self. To make a break with discontinuity. This was a clear vision for New Beacon Publications and the bookshop activity. New Beacon policy was to make available through reprint important historical novels, poetry, analysis, criticism, and campaign books. New Beacon also made a priority of publishing new poetry and literature from Britain, Sudan, Jamaica, Nigeria, South Africa, and Trinidad and Tobago. John LaRose and New Beacon believe culture allied with politics was the important tool for social justice and struggle. I've made a list of historical reprints and campaign books published by New Beacon for this presentation. I'll pass it on to the organizers at the end. The New Beacon policy led to the reprint and publication of Fraudacity, West Indian Fables by John Anthony Froude, by J.J. Thomas, from the 1888 original published in London. James Anthony Froude was an emeritus professor from Oxbridge who wrote the book, The English in the West Indies, a publication in which Froude used prejudice, white supremacy, and racism to justify and be an intellectual apologist for the brutal slavery system and the horrors of unjust British colonialism. J.J. Thomas's Fraudacity was an internationally celebrated challenge to Froude's racist arguments against Black rule and independence. This was not long after slavery and emancipation. Fraudacity was a proud Black intellectual refutation of all Froude's racist ideas. Thomas also listed the existence of Black intellectuals. This was a pioneering publication. New Beacon chose an illustration from Art Derry, a Trinidadian artist based in Britain, for the cover of Fraudacity. Art was a childhood friend of my mother, Irma LaRose, and illustrated many of New Beacon's early book covers. The other important artist used for New Beacon book covers was Errol Lloyd, who was also a member of the Caribbean Artist Movement, CAM, a playwright, children's book author, and illustrator. John Jacob Thomas was a qualified school teacher from South Trinidad, when in those times, qualified teachers were not Black. Cedric Robertson commented that that Thomas had a big impact on Trinidad's Black intelligentsia and radical tradition, influencing people like C.L.R. James, Claudia Jones, and Eric Williams. Thomas was also the author of another New Beacon reprint in 1969, The Theory and Practice of Creole Grammar, published originally in 1889. This book validated Trinidad's Creole lingua franca, challenging in a scientific and grammatical manner the denigration of Caribbean nation language in colonial society, at the same time raising the issue of language and power. And Fraudacity was not without criticism. Thomas did not support universal suffrage, i.e. the right for all in society to vote. Bridget Brereton, in her 1977 John Jacob Thomas An Estimate, said, Thomas does not show that he understood the political links between Christianity, slavery, and imperialism in the Caribbean. Gordon Roller also discussed it in Fraudacity, a Re-Examination, Parts of New World in 1971. Gordon points out, Thomas failed to show the extent of prejudice by the unreality of Thomas's fairly placid picture of post-emancipation Trinidad. Criticism and discussion of issues are part of contestation of ideas that is strongly supported by New Beacon and its publication policy. As a young Black person in London in the early 1970s, struggling with racism, police targeting, racial attacks, white superiority, and class hierarchy in Britain, I was impressed with fraudacity. I was amazed that as far back as 1888, J.J. Thomas, a Black Caribbean man, had the confidence and capacity to challenge the racism spouted by a British academic intellectual from class-ridden Britain. It revealed to me an independent intellectual tradition in the Caribbean as far back as the 19th century. The impact of New Beacon's John Jacob Thomas publication of Fraudacity was that it had been successful in bringing history and previous struggles to a new generation of people in Britain, like me. When I later became a New Beacon director, I had a clear vision of what our aim was in publishing and book selling. A luta continua, the struggle continues. It may take new forms. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. I'm seeing echoes already in the kind of ability to be kind of self-critical of our thinkers, in terms of, I think, Thomas not being a supporter of universal suffrage, but also, how inspiring they can be for us. Okay. So, but yeah, we'll pick up on that, as I say, and I'd like now to invite Luke Daniels to offer his talk, but first just to say Luke is a social and political activist, counsellor and consultant on domestic violence. He is the author of the books Pulling the Punches, Defeating Domestic Violence, that was published by Bogle Literature, and Defeating Domestic Violence in the Americas, Men's Work, which was published by Hansib. He is president of the Caribbean Labour Solidarity, a London-based organisation founded more than 40 years ago, and is an active campaigner in the reparations movement. So thank you, Luke. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Juanita. I must confess before speaking that I thought I had a copy of this book from the beginning. I didn't have it. But I thought it would make sense to talk about Richard's work in general, because I know the thread of his thinking, and the title suggests it's going to be about hope. So there's much I can say about Richard Hart, who was a great friend. I just came across the tribute I paid to him.
The pamphlet, I think, that inspired you was Forward to Freedom. That's the one that's on there.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. And I thought it would be in my collection, but unfortunately it wasn't. But so I begin by just looking at the obit that I wrote at the time, or the tribute, and then say some more things personal, because I agree with Richard very well, and he's inspired me to a great extent in the work that I'm doing. And as you said rightly, he was the honorary president. He was the president and then honorary president for Caribbean Labour Solidarity. I've been the president now for maybe 10 years or so. So I follow in his footsteps in some way. And what I wrote at the time was that it is deep sadness and a sense of loss that I have to inform our members and friends of the death of our honorary president, Dr. Richard Hart, on the 21st of December 2013. I'd come to know Dick, as he fondly called, over the past 35 years of involvement in Caribbean Labour Solidarity, an organization of which he's a founder member. Richard and a few other friends, including Lionel Jeffrey and Preston Taylor, both of whom are also now deceased, past presidents of CLS, came together in London in defense of trade unionists in Jamaica. During this campaign, it became clear to them that a permanent anti-imperialist organization was necessary in the fight against capitalism in the Caribbean. Thus, CLS was born in 1974. It is indeed ironic that this year the time, it was 2014. We are making marking the 40th anniversary since CLS came about as a result of mistreatment of workers in Jamaica. At the time when CLS is yet again involved parking on a campaign for justice for the residents of Tivoli Gardens, Jamaicans who were mercilessly attacked by the security forces in 2010 in an attempt to apprehend the wanted drug baron Judas Coke. Some people might remember that story, for extradition to the USA. Some people say hundreds of people were killed as a result of the police action, and communities were destroyed. If Richard Hart could be described in one paragraph, this is the best I've seen at the back of his book, The Life and Resurrection of Marcus Garvey, published by Curry Press. Richard Hart was a pioneer in the development of trade unions, political parties and organizations in the Caribbean. Although he pursued a career as a solicitor, he is more widely known as a historian than politician. He has written numerous books, pamphlets, and papers. He is indeed a pioneer in the Caribbean for trade unions. He founded the political parties. One was with Richard Hart as long back as in 1937, together with Hugh Clifford, Buchanan, Frank Hill, Albert Morris, T.G. Christian, Cecil Nelson, Lionel Lynch, and Wesley A. McBee. He established the first Marxist group in Jamaica. Dick, although he came from a background of upper middle class, his dad was a solicitor, he read a lot of the books. His father had an extensive library, Marxist library as well, and he read many of those books, and he was inspired by Marxism. He led the fight to free Bustamante when he was arrested in Jamaica, and eventually Richard also would be imprisoned by the British for his activities. He then moved to the UK and studied to become a lawyer. And returning, he went to Guyana as well. He was really I would say, a very true Caribbean man that he got involved with the whole region as a whole. He didn't just think that, I'm a Jamaican, he was kind of focused on Jamaica and his use. He worked in Guyana with the other Marxists in the region, who was Jerry Jagan, whose government was eventually the British had suspended the constitution. Richard then, after working a number of years in Guyana, left and returned to England to take up work, as a solicitor, and he stayed there for a while. And as I said earlier on, he, along with friends, founded CLS to help represent workers in Jamaica. His legacy is that we've continued as an organization. We've been going for about 50 years now. We continue to fight for the people in the Caribbean and the diaspora. And this recent period has seen a lot of activities in London, mainly because of the rise in the far right and the attacks on migrants and refugees that we're seeing. And I know it's something that Richard would have supported wholeheartedly. Richard was an amazing speaker. When I first met him, this quiet man, I couldn't believe when I heard him speak at a public meeting. He had transformed to somebody with real authority and knowledge, and could inspire people. And I was inspired from listening to him. He was at a time when politicians were not respected too much. Richard, maintained a sense of integrity and honesty that people believed in. He was one politician that was easy to follow. One of the things that I remember in my early days with with contact with CNS, as I should add, as a representative for the Working People's Alliance Party, which was the party of Walter Rodney. We formed a support group in the UK, and I was delegated as the person to represent the support group at the Caribbean. There were solidarity meetings, and this is how I got to really get to know Richard Hart. Two things stood out for me during that period of time is that once we had a discussion about some political activity that was happening and something of concern, I can't remember the immediate thing, but it's the effect of what it was that was important for me, is that I had argued against almost everybody else for us to take up a certain position. And it transpired after about 4 weeks that my position I took up was correct. And Richard was the first to acknowledge to the group that, Luke had said, as a young politician then at the time, that encouraged me in my political activism. He was very fair, and I remember anybody coming through from the Caribbean that it was of any political status, including Cherry Jagan, Morris Bishop, the Manleys, they visited with CNS to have a meeting. And I think also Angela Davis, because one of the pictures in the archives that looks very much to me, it wasn't a very clear picture, but it was an afro, a light skin rose, and it looks like Angela Davis, but can't confirm for sure. But in some ways it would have made sense because they were the leading communists in the UK at the time, and Angela Davis, as many of you know, was a communist. Had she come to London, she would have met with Richard Hart and others for a small meeting. So I think he was there. He knew all the politicians, and one meeting with Cherry Jagan that I was present at, and our party wasn't, although a Marxist party, and Cherry Jagan's was also a Marxist party. We weren't in complete alignment because we felt, and Walter felt, that Cherry followed too closely the dictates of the Soviet Union. Walter was more of an individual kind of Marxist and thought you needed to adapt to the conditions and so on. So we had that slight the difference. So as a result of the meeting, for me, who was representing the Working People's Alliance, I felt my job was to give Cherry Jagan as hard a time as possible, which really descended into a bloodbath, I must say, because Cherry was a practiced politician coming from Guyana with all the information and facts at his fingertips. And I was there just trying to, and there was Richard trying to deflect and times and the thing, but I didn't too much. I kept fighting and harassing him all the way. But yeah, so that was Richard. He was a great guy like that. Some of the pictures I've taken of him over the time, shows him, as the human that he really is, with an ice cream and so on, eating ice cream. He's somebody who really loved a laugh and a joke, and he always had some interesting stories to tell us over the period of time. And one in particular that I remember is of him being invited to Jamaica, and they sent one of the comrades to meet him at the airport. And as he was waiting over a period of time, nobody just had come to him to greet him. And eventually somebody came over to apologize. They said, oh, he thought Richard Hart was a black man, so he overlooked Richard Hart. And as Richard said, the poor fellow had to apologize to him twice because Richard replied, but I'm a colored man, So the guy then had to apologize to him. He said, oh, I'm sorry. So he twice apologizing, once for taking him to be thinking he was a white man and then apologizing again. Yes, because he was a black man, then he's discovered. And that was Richard. These people, I think I've probably got my time.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Thank you so much, and really interesting to hear. Very. We're going to move now
Oh,
to.
sorry, before I forget, I should have said that to Erica. I think she's still there. I'm hoping you're there, Erica.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you are. And if you look into the crowd carefully, you might see Julian Rogers.
Oh, okay.
Right to the back, waving there. There you go.
Hi, Julian.
He's waving.
I think that's
That's very. Okay, so moving now to Amelia. Just to introduce you, Amelia Gentleman is an investigative journalist for the Guardian newspaper. She was named Journalist of the Year and Press Gazette, and won the 2018 Paul Foot Journalism Award for her reportage on the Windrush scandal. She is author of the Windrush Betrayal, Exposing the Hostile Environment. 2020, I think was published. Earlier in her career, Amelia was the New Delhi correspondent for the International Herald Tribune and the Paris and Moscow correspondent for the Guardian. Welcome, Amelia.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to come, and it's such interesting, different presentations. I'm going to talk a bit about the Windrush scandal, and the item that I've chosen is a copy of the CUKC passport, which you can see in the gallery. So I'm going to hand around, it's probably easiest, a copy of my book, where you can see here a copy of the CUKC passport. In the gallery, I think they've got both passports. The passports that were given to British citizens and the passports that were given to British subjects, citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. I hadn't ever seen one of the CUKC passports until January 2018, when I went to the home of a man called Hubert Howard. Hubert Howard was somebody who had travelled to the UK as a baby from Jamaica. He came in 1960, so obviously 2 years before independence, and he travelled with his mum, and they came to the UK for a better life. And on the passport that he showed me, that you can see there in the book, his name was written in kind of beautiful copperplate handwriting beneath the name of his mother. Hubert stayed in the UK, like I think 17% of the population, 9 million people. He never renewed a passport, never got a passport in adult life, didn't think that he needed one, in fact, didn't need one. But I went to see him because as he had approached retirement age, he'd begun to have a series of really difficult problems with the Home Office. He had tried to go back to Jamaica in around 2010, as his mum, who'd retired back there, was very ill, and he wanted to go and be with her for the last months of her life. And he went to try to secure travel documents with still that passport as evidence he thought that he was a British citizen. And he was told that passport wasn't enough. He was told that he needed to naturalise as a British citizen. He was told it was going to cost him £780, and that he would need to pass the test of life in the UK and a test of English language, which he thought was both completely hilarious, but also really insulting, because he had been in Britain since he was carried into the country as a baby. He'd never left the country, and
he had no other language. So he said he wasn't going to go through that process. I think at the time there were complicating reasons that made it actually not possible for him to go through the process, and his mother died in Jamaica and he wasn't able to see her before her death. Somehow, though, in the process of trying to regularize his situation, he found that he'd been shunted onto a Home Office list of people who were classified as immigration offenders, as illegal immigrants. And he began to get letters, first from the Home Office, and then the Home Office contracted out to Capita the process of getting in touch with immigration offenders. So he began also to get texts on his mobile phone that said, you are a person who is here without leave, you need to take steps to leave the country, or you face arrest. As a result of being on that immigration offender list, he began to experience immense practical difficulties in his life. So he was asked by Peabody, where he was working as an estate manager, to provide evidence to reassure them that he wasn't an immigration offender. And he wasn't able to, because what he had was that passport that you've just seen, which wasn't sufficient. So he lost his job. By the time that I went to see him in January 2018, he had been trying to persuade the Home Office for a number of years that they'd made a mistake and that he was in the UK legally, but without any success. So that, but yeah, by the time we met, he was in a really difficult situation. He hadn't been able to work. He didn't have very much money. He wasn't eligible for benefits, and his friends were helping him to buy food and clothes. So yeah, these passports are incredibly powerful documents and a really important part of the exhibition that I was lucky enough to see last year. I've been thinking a lot about the Windrush scandal recently. It's 7 years now since the government apologised for its mistakes, promised to do the right thing by the thousands of people who had been misclassified as immigration offenders. Hubert Howard did get documentation and was trying to naturalise. However, he became very ill, and he was still trying to naturalise and persuade the Home Office that they should grant him a British passport when he died in a hospital in East London, I think in 2020. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I would have ever imagined that I'd still be writing about the fallout from the Windrush scandal 7 years later. But it is something that we're covering regularly still in The Guardian, partly because the commitments that first the Conservative government and now Labour have made to delivering compensation to those affected have fallen short. We know that over 66 people have died in the period between applying for compensation and getting it. And we're aware that the way the compensation scheme doesn't really work, because no legal aid has been allocated to those affected, unlike the people affected by the Post Office scandal, unlike the people affected by the infected blood scandal. People applying for Windrush compensation have to more or less do it themselves. And there have been some really interesting bits of research that show on appeal, people who've been initially granted nothing can find that they are allocated £80,000, £250,000 once they've got support from a charity or from a lawyer. So there's kind of the original scandal, and then there's been this second scandal to do with the way that compensation has been paid. But the reason why I'm thinking a lot about the Windrush scandal at the moment is because I see a lot of parallels between the political narrative at the moment, where we've got Labour, the Conservatives, and Reform in an arms race on attempting to outdo themselves, attempting to outdo each other with the harshness of their commitments on immigration. And it really makes me think about 2010, when David Cameron first made a commitment to reducing net migration to the tens of thousands. And then 2012, when Theresa May announced that work was underway to create a really hostile environment for illegal immigrants. And the motivation for both David Cameron and Theresa May to kind of push those very tough new immigration structures was the rise in popularity of Nigel Farage's UKIP party, which was really biting at their ankles. And we're seeing exactly the same process now that Nigel Farage's new party is alarming parties on both sides, and the speed with which politicians are making commitments to promise to be the party to deport 250,000 immigrants a year, or to restructure the system for indefinite leave to remain, makes me really thoughtful, because a decade ago, a similarly speedy attempt to reorganise the entire immigration control system led to the Windrush scandal. So yeah, it's a very thought-provoking period, and I suppose the final point that made me think about those two passports was the recent announcement by Labour of a commitment or a consideration of introducing digital ID cards that they showed branded as, I think they were going to call them Brit passes or Brit cards, and the online version is very decorated with Union Jacks. And I mean, I'm not totally sure what I think about it. I don't think that it's going to be a silver bullet for immigration control if that's what they're aiming for. But it's just a very, very thought-provoking period at the moment.
Thank you very much for that. Amelia's kind of preempted my question, because that was exactly what I wanted to ask, was actually about the ID card, how you'd felt about that. I just want to check, Argila, we've only got 10 minutes. Are we fixed to the time? Is everybody here okay if we slip over slightly?
The room.
We have the room. What are your views on if we slip on maybe 10, 15 minutes extra? Is that okay with everyone? So I will come back to you with the question about the ID cards, but I'd like to come back now to Erica. I think one of the things I really like about this exhibition, I guess, is that I feel like it addresses Stuart Hall's idea of a living archive. You know, you have archives, but they need to be visited and they need to be revisited. There's no point having archives without them being reconsidered. But also I was thinking about what you'd said, and also Michael pointing out about the importance of these histories to the community, but also highlighting the difficulties of these histories. I mean, you talked about Nkrumah being somebody who'd been inspiring initially to then the disillusionment. And I think Michael also talked about Fredacity as this very inspiring document, but on the other hand, he hadn't been supportive of universal suffrage. And one of the things I think generally in the wider context of the UK, we have this kind of conflict between something we call the culture wars. And my understanding is you're very committed to this idea of history as something we need to be very transparent about, the good, the bad, the ugly, the warts and all kind of history. And I wondered if you can share your kind of advice on how you've handled pushback on the parts of history that people haven't really wanted to know about.
Well, the old adage, if you don't pay attention to your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think every single day, I'm sure in the UK as well as in the US where I live, I'm thinking of emigrating soon, but it is proven because we are reliving exactly what happened decades ago. I mean, in one way or the other, some who do not know about decades ago might say, I'm talking about the US right now, might think it's worse, but it actually wasn't. And so I am, in spite of being a hopelessly non-academic student and failing miserably at history in school, it's the greatest of ironies that this is where I have found myself. This is where I've landed, and I am absolutely passionate about it because for that reason, if we don't pay attention to the road marks of the past, as one of my favorite sayings goes, the present begins to lose its points of reference. And so the naked attempt in the United States to rewrite history is, and I love all these people with their euphemisms. It's troubling. No, it's not troubling. It's disastrous. How do you mean it's troubling? It's scandalous. And we cannot allow it.
Thank you, Erica, for that. I'm wondering, Michael, but this is a difficult question, but I wonder if you could think about what strategies, how can we think about, thinkers of the past, what strategies they might use today to kind of handle this problem with misinformation, but also, largely with the misinformation, but also the gaps in the knowledge that people have.
As a previously and still an activist, the issue of ideas for me is the issue, not the personality or the idol or the loyalty to the human being, but to the ideas produced. And those ideas have to be put under scrutiny, have to be put under some critical thinking any time in history. People's ideas and what they do change throughout their lives. And what would be supported at one point may not be supported at another point. So this question of ideas and contestation of ideas, which is what I put in my piece, is very important to find out and to find a way to the truth or the strategy that you want to get from those ideas.
But also encourage nuance in conversation. I find people today kind of, the popularity of Trump is in things like sound bites, and people aren't really having the more difficult conversations that they need to be having.
I had a conversation this morning with a group of students from Germany, talking about New Beacon, but talking about what was going on in the world and how they wanted to deal with it from their position in Germany, and how people here have done it historically as well as presently. The point was that we have to have these discussions. We have to have these exchanges because that's how we grow and find new strategies and new ways. And we cannot just put people on pedestals without have some critical thinking about the ideas then and the ideas now.
Can I throw that question
Yeah.
to you too as well?
Yes, sure. For me, I really think organization and education is so important. We've survived and we're growing, when most other organizations have dropped away, because since I'm talking about Caribbean left, especially because since the Americans invaded Grenada and ended that revolution, the left really has been destroyed in the Caribbean. So we need to keep that going. The big issue for us at the moment with Caribbean solidarity is fighting for reparations for slavery, and key to that is education, because supremacist thinking or white supremacy thinking in this UK, is so prevalent. It's why the far right could easily feed into, old misinformation about Africans and, smaller brains, lack of intelligence, and all kinds of stuff that the tropes that are there. And so immigration has actually now become the dog whistle for racism, because all the anti-migrant stuff that's happening is beginning to affect all Black people in this country. And this is why I feel, I'm motivated at the moment to really push to reaching out to the Black youth in this country in particular to get information about the histories and what's going on. Political education is important. We got, there's a big event coming up soon, and we're mobilizing for that.
It's great to hear that you're engaging with the younger generation as well, because I feel they're left out of these conversations so often. But I have a question I wanted to ask you just about Richard Hart, because he kind of straddles this, bridges activism during the Caribbean independence period, but also the migrant struggles in Britain. And I'm wondering what his legacies can tell us about the importance of transnational solidarity. Particularly now, we've seen how what the situation is in America is pretty much mirrors or we're mirroring that probably the other way around.
He was a true internationalist, and he had great connections in Africa, in Caribbean, in America, all over the world, really, so was friendly on first terms with Fidel Castro and people like that. So, he always reached out. But I think one of his books for me was one really important is Slaves to Abolish Slavery. And this, yes, part 1 and 2. And in that he puts the argument really that, it's the way in which the various and numerous rebellions in the Caribbean started to make the enslavement of Africans not so profitable, and forced the British in some ways to concede and to emancipate the enslaved. And it's not so much will be forced, or the other factors in the UK were instrumental in it. And for me, that gives agency to Black people that, look, our ancestors fought hard and long, and we need to continue to fight, and we need that fight right now, because it seems, like I mentioned in one of my talks I did sometime about the Windrush, I mentioned that would not have happened without slavery. It was the same kind of treatment. You can't go and see your family. They have no respect for family and friends, and this is just carried on, in almost every institution in this country, which has been found to be institutional racist. Yeah. So the problems are there and deep, and I think reparations movement actually offers us the opportunity not only to educate the white people in the UK, but also for Black people, because many Caribbean people and Black people haven't got a history at them. The same misinformation that was being pumped out about Africans. Many Black people have kind of taken that on board. So you end up with somebody like Bad Enough,
Bad Enough.
in Parliament.
Yeah.
And Lammy, if I can name a few, because they are not representing the interests of the majority of Black people.
Thank you. Gosh, so Amelia, I don't know if you want to add to anything the panel has said on that, but I was going to come back to you about this issue of IDs. Because one of the things that came up in the Windrush scandal was it wasn't just about legislation, it was also sometimes just about how immigration officers treat people of colour coming through, passing through customs. So there'd been a case of some people in the room may know, Bob Cheertown, who was Guyanese, and he had visited a friend in Ghana, and then coming back through customs, they had said to him, Bob Cheertown, that's a Chinese sounding name, but you look African. And he said, well, yes, I'm from Guyana. We have, quite a mixed society then, but they didn't believe him. And they destroyed his passport. And it took him a long time to then get his passport back. And what I found was there's a lot of people who are actually holders of British passports, not indefinite leave to remain, not any other kind of status, but holders of British passports, whose ID was then not accepted as real. And so that's what I'm kind of interested in. And now that Labour are proclaiming that, our digital ID cards will solve the problems that we're facing, and that, and help deal with the controlling immigration. I mean, you've kind of inferred that you don't know what the answer is, but that was the question. I wondered if you could add thoughts to that.
Well, I suppose I think I'm meant to have a kind of ideological opposition towards ID cards, and so I think I do, but I also wonder whether I need to revisit that. I'm really just putting my uncertainty on the table. This is not a considered response, but that given that we are giving away to Google every private secret of our life, we allow ourselves to be tracked. They know what time we go to sleep. I don't know. I mean, I spoke to one of the policymakers behind the ID card proposal, who was saying it's got a dual aim. Firstly, we want to be able to say that we're doing something to show that we've got a policy on immigration control, but on the other side, we want to be able to use it for more efficient distribution of benefits payments. And there can be, a good side to it too. So anyway, I'll just park my uncertainty on that question and remember, I suppose, that one thing that writing about the Home Office for a decade has really taught me is that as well as the kind of malice involved in leading to the Windrush scandal, there was also an enormous amount of incompetence. And so it's kind of getting those two things together that is often very problematic. And so I'm not sure I've got total faith in a kind of competent rolling out of the ID card system, and I also don't really understand how it begins to deal with the it doesn't really help people who are undocumented, because and the other thing that really disturbed me, I suppose, about the incompetence both of the Home Office and then when it was outsourced to Capita, seeing the names of people like Suresh Grover, who was very venerated and campaigner, accidentally on the list. I mean, we think that the Home Office should know the right answers. It doesn't. So yeah, I think I'm getting my answer to a conclusion that I feel nervous.
Yeah. No, I would join that, but I join you in that, because it reminds me a bit of the Postal Service, in the sense that they were, inputting information into their systems, but it's still being scrabbled elsewhere. And I just think there's too much room in terms of anything that's digitized. They might lose your details, and so it still doesn't, or they might get it wrong, or they might input it in the wrong place, the wrong way. So it doesn't actually solve the sorts of problems that were experienced by the Windrush generation. I'm just conscious of the time, and I want to just offer the opportunity, if the audience have any questions they want to pose. Anyone? If not, did you have a question? You kind of look like you might have one
Just
comment.
have to make a quick comment.
Yeah.
I'm coming from home.
Please tell us your name as well, if you don't mind.
My name is Julian Rogers. I'm a journalist, and I just wanted to share with you what's happening back in the Caribbean. In that 4 countries in the Caribbean community, namely Barbados, Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, have just implemented what is known as free movement on the 1st of October. In essence, it's like getting permanent residence in each of those territories. I'm from Barbados, but I live in Belize. And what I found very interesting was the discussion in the talk shows, radio talk shows in particular in Barbados, suggesting that this would be a flood of people coming from other countries of the Caribbean. So I was moved to write a Substack column, more than one actually, pointing out that this was not going to happen. And in fact, somebody likened it to possible rapture, which the Christians are waiting for in the first few days of October. As it turned out, we have had a form of free movement under what they call the CARICOM Skill National Program. And the categories of people who could move started with graduates of the University of the West Indies, and it's moved all the way down to vocational positions such as nurses, caregivers, etc., who could move around the region. That facility has really been very slow in the uptake. My numbers show somewhere in the region of 900 of those certificates issued by Barbados, and only about 98 people between 2016 and 2025. So that the point to be made is that people move, as you would well know, for economic opportunities. And I've had to make the point that Barbados cost of living is extremely high. And I made the comparison with, say, Belize, where I'm now living, where breakfast I could get for $1 US versus maybe $20 or $30 in Barbados. So there's no flood. Thing is that is what I want to share with you. But the other point I'd make is that listening to Erica and listening, of course, to the chronicling of what has happened between, say, 1947 when I was born and now, we seem to be going back to the same old story, but with the same idea that you raised, which is the idea has germinated and is being carried on by various people over time, whether it is a Caribbean-wide unity or whether it's our sharing and driving a Pan-African thrust. I reach a point as a journalist wondering whether there will ever come a day when these ideas would be truly realized. And I suppose I'm an optimist, so I'm not despairing, but it does give me cause.
Thank you for the optimism. Anyone else got any other questions? If not, we'll probably, unless any of you want to add anything to the talk, we'll probably wrap it up. Did you have any comments you wanted to make?
No,
I just wanted to say a little bit about Windrush, because I think, what you've done in some ways to applaud you raise that awareness about that hostile environment to many people. And I'm just glad you're still interested in the issue and doing stuff, because the hostile environment continues now from all of the political parties, the main political parties, and come election year, it's going to be ours. And we need to just get set for that. And I can alert you to one thing that's happening soon. On the 15th of November, we'll be picketing the Parliament, actually. And this is RMT, the union, because as you probably know, the government has raised the threshold for workers in this country and the visas. People who have come legally working with London Transport, maybe they came out earning 30,000 at the time when they got a job. The government has now raised the threshold to over 40,000. They've served notice for over 200 workers to leave because they're not fulfilling the requirements. So there's a history. The unions are mobilizing for the 15th. I'll be there with my band CLS because a lot of Caribbean people are affected by it. So I'll make sure we're out there too. And that's at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
Can I make a point about the ID cards? We live in a period of oligarchs with technology making the world, and in a way where we will all be treated like Palestinians in Gaza, with no sympathy, no empathy, just let's do it. And I think of authoritarian regimes and how they would like to use ID cards. And that gives me the reason not to be part of any ID cards situation. I know that the Chinese, in dealing with their dissidents, use a card that has everything on it. And to stop them operating, they cut the card off. They can't go on. They can't get to their bank. They can't go on transport. They can't do lots of things. It gives power in a time where these oligarchs are more and more taking over governments. What really is problematic about it is so-called parliamentary democracies can easily turn into authoritarian. And that is what I think is one of the problems at this point. But the real danger is the oligarchs, but the weakness of democratic, so-called democratic governments is a real problem.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because thinking about China in that situation, you gain points for being a good or bad citizen, and that's how they manage your access to different services. And it might sound a bit far-fetched for the UK, but then you have to remember that, you know, even one of the criteria to becoming British or naturalising as British is this good conduct criteria that they have. You know, are you a good person? And also their, you know, as part of their deportation policies as well, because you didn't have good conduct, you can then be deported. You know, if you commit a crime that's maybe attracts a sentence of more than a year or more. So they're already using it in some ways as a way of determining who gets
for me,
citizenship.
the Windrush brings it all home immediately. No matter if you had a proper passport or a Commonwealth passport, you still can be challenged on your citizenship. And this one card situation that the parliamentary democracies have been really wanting for a very long time and have been resisted by the people of the country has not been possible in places like China. And that is where they are at. And I don't want to be there.
No, I mean, we've actually seen, I don't know if anybody watched Farage on Question Time at one point, was talking about, well, if they came into power, they would have things to say about people who are in indefinite leave to remain and all that kind of thing. So it is a concern if they do bring that in. I mean, can I ask you one other question? I was thinking about the book, The Windrush Betrayal. Is there, because I think when I first met you, sorry, let me start from the beginning. Amelia was on the advisory board of the Windrush Scandal project that I worked on. And so I remember when I first met you, you were quite optimistic about, I think you thought the government would respond. They were really going to take seriously their claim to want to right the wrongs. And I'm just really curious as to, I feel like who you were when you wrote The Windrush Betrayal may have changed, and I'm wondering if you feel, looking back on it, whether you've written the book differently or you'd include different things in it, like what are your thoughts then?
100%, because I feel ashamed when I look back at the way that we embarked on the investigating everything at The Guardian, because you know, I could have done it much more quickly if I'd known a lot more. The whole process was a kind of an education. And I do remember my colleague, Gary Young, we were talking about whether or not the compensation scheme would work. And I was saying, well, you know, they allocated 200 million to 500 million in the abstract. And, you know, they've got a whole team of people in Sheffield working on it. And he just kind of shook his head at me and laughed. So you know, it's not, it's not that I've become more cynical, but I've definitely become, yeah, more circumspect.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Thank you. And before we close, Erica, I just wanted to come to you to say I was thinking about giving you a role in curating the Eric Williams Memorial Lecture. If you had any sort of if you found that the archives are being used to support maybe political education or reparations discourse, just what sort of intellectual legacies of your father's have you been able to do you feel that those archives are being accessed by schools? Do you know to what extent they're being used?
Well, it's not schools, it would be, you know,
The
researchers, right,
yeah, the
right.
researchers,
I can say, I just want to say one thing about what you all have been discussing about righting the wrongs with the Windrush scandal. And then I'll, if you don't mind, I'll come to what you just asked me. I'm intrigued by the comments about righting wrongs. Well, where I live, they're not righting any wrongs. They're piling wrong upon wrong upon wrong. And then if they can't find any more wrongs, they create wrongs. So you guys are so, we here, if you want to, we are so far ahead of what is going on where you are, which as unsatisfactory as troubling as it is, I mean, you know, Americans like to say that there's a pond between you all and us, but just look across the pond on any given day. It's astonishing, utterly astonishing. And I don't have any optimism whatsoever. So now coming back to the Eric Williams Memorial Collection, Research Library, Archives and Museum, we're really visited by researchers. Schools traditionally are not allowed in there, but I am certain, you know, we're kind of loose. So if you had a student who wanted to do research on a particular project, I am absolutely certain they would be allowed to do that. I'll give you an interesting proposition. There was a former UWI, University of the West Indies history professor, Dr. Brinsley Samaru, who was very involved in the 1970s opposition to Eric Williams and his administration. And he was reasonably virulent, I would say. He was one of those university, you know, UWI professors that were the dissidents in the 1970s. And when the EWMC became operational and was active and available, he did significant research. He also bought into this erroneous premise that Eric Williams was anti-Indian, etc. So anyway, he did substantial research in the archives, and he turned completely around. In fact, he actually edited my father's last book that he died and he never saw it published. And it was just published like 40 years after he died. Brinsley edited the book, right? So, I mean, it was just incredible. It's called The Blackest Thing in Slavery Was Not the Black Man. And so Brinsley edited the book. Eric Williams had like 1,000 handwritten pages. Brinsley edited it down to about 256. It was published by UWI Press. But what I'm saying is those archives was absolutely critical in Brinsley having one point of view at one time and a completely opposite point of view at another time. So history can change lives.
Thank you for that very optimistic ending, despite what you said. Yeah, so let's bring this to a close. If you could put your hands together for our